Wes Palmisano, welcome to the Preconstruction Podcast.
Great to be with you, Gareth.
Thank you. We've got the founder and the CEO of Impetus Construction, or just Impetus as we know it. For anybody that doesn't know you, Wes, can you give us a quick background? Now, I know there's a lot to go through. I think you're third generation. Is that right?
That is right. Yeah. In background, I grew up in a construction family. My grandfather started a small construction company after returning from World War II in 1950 in the New Orleans community. He worked, and then eventually my dad and my uncle joined him in the business. And so, like many other family construction companies, they worked together and had a great working relationship. And I was fortunate to grow up working in that business. And they were true master builders and what I describe as kind of the old school general contractor that, although they worked in the single family residential space, they worked on their tools. And so I grew up and was fortunate enough to learn the trades of construction from an early age. And that's been a big advantage for me throughout my career. And they certainly taught me a lot of the values that I still hold today, and the value of hard work and what it takes to get something done on the job site. And then after graduating construction management from LSU down here in South Louisiana, I transitioned into a role in a commercial construction company and learned the commercial side of the business. And that experience was a tremendous learning opportunity for me to grow and really learn the larger project side of the business in the commercial industry. And I spent 12 years doing that before ultimately taking an entrepreneurial journey. So I spent time in a family business, then working for someone else. And then in 2013, and we're just approaching our 10-year anniversary of the company that I founded in 13. And my family business and legacy is still alive and well. So my dad was still doing the residential thing and then subsequently retired and actually joined us. And so my dad still works with us today. And it's always great to have him around. And he's actually 78 at this point, still coming in and spending time with us in the business. And so that family legacy and connection is still there. But, I had high growth plans and big aspirations for what we wanted Impetus to be. And, the smaller family business and where my dad was in his life at that point in time of getting close to and approaching retirement, it made a lot of sense to really just take off with a new business and then, tie in that family legacy at the same time.
Brilliant. And literally, Wes, I know we were discussing offline, we could talk here for about 3 hours. There's no doubt about it. With your background, coming out of college, that whole residential commercial side, the experience you've built up, then founding Impetus, 10 years anniversary. What a great time to come on the podcast and discuss the success stories, the lessons learned. The how fast you guys are growing. It's not easy. And I know this from dealing with pre-construction teams. It's not easy growing this fast, but some of the foundations, and anybody listening now and thinking, what are we going to get out of this podcast? Trust me, it's worth listening to this story, because if you're interested in pre-construction services, if you're interested in an academy, building an academy, how to run a business using people, using pre-construction services, you got to keep listening, because Wes has got a fascinating story. That was a great bio. So 10 years in, Wes, tell me, when you first stepped inside Impetus and decided, you know what, this is what I want to do, what was going through your head? Had you got such an aggressive, hyper growth kind of attitude from this very start, or did you want to take it steady?
No, we had a very aggressive high growth plan from day one. And the initial plan, and I kind of look back and laugh about it today, because I think, maybe being naive and maybe somewhat young and foolish enough to do so, that, I think it was part of our success is that we were somewhat fearless at the beginning, but our plan was very simple. And we established ourselves in 13, and in the team, we got together and talked about it and said, we want to go 0 to 100 million as fast as possible. So I know that sounds a little crazy for a lot of construction startups out there, but that was the goal. And we actually achieved that goal in 36 months. So we went 0 to 100 million in annual revenue, and we hired about 100 people in the first 36 months of the business, starting from just myself, as a one-person organization. And we did that. You mentioned pre-construction, and that's always been a driver for our business. And I learned very early in my own career. So I started out in the field working with tools, and then I transitioned into the office and spent a lot of time in project management. But by the time I got to a vice president level within the organization I was working for, I recognized that pre-construction was the key to success on projects, and firmly believed and established a philosophy that 90% of a project's success happens before you start at the job site. And so if you can get the plan right and get the foundation for the project in the right place during pre-construction, then it's about transitioning that into operations and executing on that plan. And so 90% of that battle is won or lost before you ever even get out to the job site. And so we established the business with that same philosophy and pursued all negotiated opportunities. And we were fortunate enough to have a lot of great relationships. And so all the work that I mentioned, in terms of that 0 to 100 million growth, was all a heavy emphasis on pre-construction. And it was not, we didn't pursue bid opportunities in the market. And, as a startup business, that ability to deliver on pre-construction services played a tremendous role in our success.
Brilliant. And Wes, you say it with such confidence. I mean, I love, and I agree with you. I mean, I remember starting this business 5 years ago, and you have to be a little bit crazy. You've got to be a little bit delusional to be able to go from 0 to 100 and just not get the blinkers on. But to be able to do it focusing on pre-construction services, I mean, I deal with companies that are 400 or 500 million big, and they are struggling to get their clients to pay for pre-construction services. So having that mindset from the very, very start, dealing with clients, how difficult was that? Because I'm thinking that's difficult today. I can't imagine what it was like 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think part of our success in terms of how we sold it. So one of the things you just said that jumped out at me was this idea of selling pre-construction services to clients. And we were one of the businesses that, again, maybe call it crazy enough to come out with what we just call our guarantee around the office, which was to go to a client and, I wouldn't call it super innovative or creative, because, it's the oldest deal in the book in terms of how things are sold. But we would go to clients and offer that our pre-construction services were actually free if you weren't satisfied. So kind of the money back guarantee. And so, yes, we had a fee associated with our pre-construction services, and in all instances, those deals and the contracts moved into construction. But we start out with this idea that if you don't like what we're doing, we'll take the project up to CDs, and there's an opportunity. If you chose to put it out to bid to other contractors, feel free to do that and terminate us if you don't like what we're doing. And so it was this very confident approach to pre-construction, and knowing that our services would deliver superior value that our clients would recognize.
Incredible. So you're backing yourself. You've got skin in the game. You're completely confident of delivering. And we talked about it before coming on air, Wes. This comes from your background. As you said there, you've been on the tools, you saw the residential side through the family business, you were on the commercial side, but you spent the majority of your time within pre-construction. I think is that where the confidence comes from? You literally knew everything there was to know about pre-construction.
Well, I think it's, maybe the culmination of the skills you just mentioned that, from my own journey in my career. And, now our team has been brought up in a similar mindset. And I think that's, part of our values and philosophy as an organization that the team's bought into, that for each project, one of our core values is called Renegade mentality, which is a unique core value for our organization, and one that came out of this idea that we're always going to challenge the status quo. And so part of our approach and how, my upbringing and maybe how it ties to it is this ability to understand the fundamentals of the business in the field, understand the operational side of the equation, understand design, engineering, and architecture, and really bring those skill sets together. And I mentioned the idea that my family business that I grew up in, my dad, my grandfather, my uncle, I was around them as a young kid, and they were what I'd call a master builder. And so they understood the fundamentals of engineering and design as just as much as they did of how to get the work done. And I always try to pride myself in the ability to look at a project and come up with creative solutions that in a lot of times I'd call challenge the status quo and kind of bring the renegade approach, is really how it's described in our internal vocabulary, to that particular project. And so as renegades, we're always looking for a better way to build. And this idea that, there's always multiple ways to do things, and how can we turn the project inside out and come up with the smarter approach and really drive value through that. So we've never advertised ourselves to be the cheapest, but certainly we find ways to drive value into projects by coming up with very creative solutions on all of our projects.
Brilliant. And Wes, one thing that I always asked, I try to ask people, but you're the perfect person to answer it. Within Impetus, what is if you kind of look at the ratio between the amount of pre-construction people and the amount of operations team, just a rough guide of your employees right now, what would the ratio be?
We have, and I guess it depends on how you define operations, because we've developed what is a pretty complex organization. One of the things that I didn't mention in the initial intro is that in 15, so we started commercial construction in 13, and then in 15, we also started a heavy civil construction business. And so, as part of the journey was this idea that we can apply the same principles to other disciplines of construction. And so our heavy civil team is another fast growing area of the business that I'll kind of set aside. And we've tried to look at how can we use that same philosophy and our approach to pre-construction in the heavy civil world as well. And then we also started in 17 a series of different self-perform capacities, and this idea that we want to be a true builder and we don't want to just be a paper pushing general contractor. So, the different verticals of the business make that question a little bit difficult because we have a lot of field forces. But if I just take on the commercial construction side and look at project management resources, if I call that operations versus pre-construction, pre-construction in terms of percentage is 30 or 40% of that overall team. And on the operational side of the equation, is the other 60 or 70%. But our pre-construction team, for the size of the organization, I think is probably a little bit bigger than most organizations. And I think that's a big part of our success. Maybe in terms of putting that in numbers, we are today at about 200 million, which a big chunk of that volume today is in a self-perform delivery and in our heavy civil business. So it's across the whole organization. We're at 200 million. Our total team is 220 people today.
Brilliant.
And, in terms of the split, we have about 25, if I remember right, in project management, commercial construction project management. And there are about a dozen people on the pre-construction team. So, brilliant. That kind of puts it in numbers.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. When you look at that numbers, the reason I asked you, we grade and rate every contractor in the country, anything from your ENR 200 right down to your small to medium sized business, and we try and come up with a ratio. And what you're saying within pre-construction is way higher than the average. And I think that that's one of the things that's got to change over the next 4 to 5 years. If the two things that need to change, that needs to change. So the mindset within a contractor needs to be more pre-construction focused. Then within pre-construction, they've got to kind of amalgamate the data, the people, and the technology. And I think that's the key. I think you are, and it says with the numbers, miles ahead on the pre-construction side. What's your thought? And that leads us nicely into the technology side. We're going to finish then, well, not finish, but after the technology side, you mentioned it a few times on the Renegade Academy. I want to go into detail on that as well. But before we jump to that, how do you do your pre-construction and what technology do you use?
Yeah, so pre-con is an interesting one because we find as it relates to technology that, there's not a one size fits all. Although I know many construction companies always hope for the holy grail of being able to live and operate out of one technology. So we use a host of solutions and honestly are constantly trying to evolve and look for new options and new opportunities. Technology wise, we also, and I guess this is another thing that's an interesting spin on us, is that although I just described a kind of split between what we describe as our pre-construction department versus project management, our operational teams are engaged in a big way in the pre-construction process, and they're expected to be very hands-on throughout the entire pre-construction process, and that same philosophy that we know pre-construction delivers results. And so embedded with the pre-construction team, you could also make an argument at any given point in time. We have a lot of the operational team in there as well, and really diving into a plan to execute and actually build the job. So the operational tools are brought into the equation, the Procores. We're on Spectrum financial system, which that we try to tie in with estimating database and the way that we structure the data through the cost cycle of the project from start to finish. We're in P6 for scheduling, of course. And so that's kind of starts right at the beginning of the process. And, we're developing very detailed plans for the execution of the project from the beginning. Estimating wise, that's an interesting one that, it's almost comical within our organization, because I think I at least find that this is a common theme for construction companies like us. I'd call us kind of mid-sized construction company. It is really hard to have a software and something that's customized to the way your people work, the way that you can deal with Excel. And so that's been a common theme for us. We tied in and have worked with Destiny, with Beck's technology group from an estimating perspective. And, we have that solution. But honestly, our pre-construction people, from a cost perspective, we have custom developed Excel tools that, we've been working with for the last 10 years. And the efficiency associated with those tools is hard to ignore, just purely for costing. And, one of our approaches is that we have a really robust conceptual estimating tool that we've developed, which that's the way that we engage and work with our clients. As we come in day one, we generally are in a design build or a design assist type relationship, extremely collaborative delivery methods. We're sitting down with the designers and the owner and understanding the program for the project, and then setting a price point and ultimately driving the design to that price point. And so in a target value delivery type of model, our modeling software that we've developed that's proprietary to us in-house is really hard to get away from. And then once we have our established baseline, we're then building detail into the budget as the design develops, but ultimately driving it to the price point and really being a leader in the pre-construction process. And that's the one thing that I would say that has been a common theme for us that I think I see as a somewhat of an issue in the industry, that many contractors will kind of sit back and let the design develop and the owners driving the design, and then more reactively price the project. And our view has always been that we've got to be the leader. We need to thoroughly understand the owner's program, what's important to them, the values of what they're trying to deliver on. And then where do we have an opportunity to be really creative and help guide the process while also achieving all the designers' goals. So of course, the architects and the interior designers and the entire design team have their own things that are important to them. And so this understanding of values and what's important to each participant, and then how do we at the end drive and create win-win solutions in the things that we're actively managing throughout the entire process.
Absolutely. I mean, getting in early with the owners, the architects, and the designers, I don't think it's enough. I don't think people are doing that enough. And that is where, at the end of the day, you're going to be delivering the project for the client. So you, as well as the client, have got to be really, really comfortable and really, really happy with what you're going to be building. And when you're comfortable and happy and understand it to a decent level, then it becomes much, much easier. But something you said about pre-construction technology, I agree with you. I mean, Destiny's incredible. There's not enough solutions out there because nobody, and this is what I'm saying, every contractor thinks that they do things the same, whereas I have seen it, especially from pre-construction, it is vastly different. You go to one company, they are doing completely different things to another company, and they're almost kind of hiding it. But there isn't enough solutions out there for people to be able to go and test 3 or 4 different things and see what suits the way they do pre-construction. So I totally agree with that. But it sounds like you've got a good a good thing going with the especially the proprietary modeling system. And what do you see in the future when it comes to pre-construction technology? What would you like to see? What kind of piece of software product would you like to see come out to solve a particular problem?
Well, I mentioned our emphasis on the opportunity to impact project outcomes early. And the earlier in the pre-construction process you can be involved, the more of an opportunity there is to be impactful. As you get down to the end of the design, you're talking about details. And honestly, details don't drive project success or value. And so while you're in the conceptual phase, I think there's an opportunity as it relates to artificial intelligence and, the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence, and how can we use data and artificial intelligence to help put a tool in the hands of the construction world that really, I think, helps people get creative on what opportunities exist and how do we drive real value in the projects. And so that's one that I don't know of any similar tools that exist today where you're taking an early model of a project. And so taking a designer's model and then connecting that from a cost perspective and analyzing different opportunities to innovate on a project. And, we dig in big time into structural systems, the MEP systems, the things that drive real cost, the envelope of the building. And, we generally, although finishes are important, finishes are generally in our mind, especially in that conceptual stage of a project, somewhat secondary. That we need to have adequate budgets established, but, getting the fundamentals of the building right and, having some artificial intelligence solution that may help people come up with the right answer, because there are always so many different ways that you could approach any complex project. And, landing on the right one is really where you drive true value. And you're talking about millions of dollars of savings and opportunity, which is where you mentioned earlier, how much do you charge and how do you get compensated for pre-construction services? We've honestly always found that to be difficult because, and you look at it, if we're able to come in and save a client $2-3 million, how much is that worth? And, certainly I've argued as the person who may be helping to provide the solutions or the company that's helping to facilitate that, do we get a share of the savings? Is there some model here that we established that, it's not a monthly fee. A monthly fee that pays for people's time doesn't compensate you for providing $5 million of savings through creative thinking and ideas that wouldn't otherwise be brought to the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, Wes, as well, I think it's going to have to be a collective from the GC and CM side of things. To everyone's got to have the same idea of what pre-construction service. Is there going to be a standardization of costs? Now, obviously, from you, 10 years of data and 10 years of delivering and saving, surely you can pick up and go, listen, these are the last 10 projects that we've done. These were the values at the beginning. These is what we saved in, and this is the cost of pre-construction services. That will be invaluable to you. But the people now that are starting to try and charge for pre-construction services are going to find it much more difficult. What do you think of the solution? Is it going to be a collective where the GCs and CMs get together and kind of standardize some sort of pre-construction services chart?
I mean, certainly be a start. There's a very established standard for what a fee is to build a project. And, generally in any particular market, the GCs have an idea of what they're able to charge in that market. And, you'll find a reasonably competitive approach when you start to look at, 3 or 4 different GCs and what fee would they charge for a particular project. And, to your point, I agree that pre-construction services, there's no established norm or standard. And the GCs across the country have wildly different approaches to how they charge for those services. And I think part of that, though, is that the owners hold the cards in a lot of cases. And, many times RFP, especially if I'm just looking at it in the context, let's just look at a CMAR type of delivery. There is an established norm of this is the way the process is going to be run. And the owners are building into that competitive process in the RFP an opportunity that is generally geared around your reward is to make your fee during construction. And you're required to provide the pre-construction services in order to get the construction. And so, there's definitely an established norm from the industry, which I think relates back to the way projects were always delivered when it was design, bid, build. And, the pricing model for the industry is still in that place where I think delivery methods have gotten significantly more collaborative, and in the industry, or the pricing model for the industry, let's say, hasn't evolved along with the delivery models.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And it's something that I did a thing on LinkedIn. I was talking about a client that got 600,000 off a GC got off a client for doing pre-construction service, but for the same type of project, maybe I think it was like 35 miles down the road for a different client, and they were only willing to pay 100,000. And it's too big a gap, and if the client doesn't understand the value of pre-construction services, it just becomes really, really, really difficult. But it's an ongoing issue, but it's something that needs to be talked about more often. And I think getting GCs in the room, whether it be at a big conference or a webinar or whatever, I think it can only help the industry.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the value of pre-construction, and I mean, in some ways, or at least some owners that I've talked about this, which is an interesting debate that, as you mentioned at the beginning of the call, I think we could go on and on about the different perspectives on pre-construction pricing. But some of the owners that I've approached, almost look at it in a sense as somewhat of a split fee. So say as a general contractor, just pick a round number, say you have a 5% fee. Well, is it 1.5% for pre-con and 3.5% for operations? Or, there's some mindset that in some cases the clients perceive it, and some of the clients that we work with, as we're kind of deferring our pre-construction fees in some ways, or we're charging a smaller amount than what we actually spend during pre-construction, and deferring because, in most cases, especially in these cooperative deliveries that we do, that the client is waiting to get to a financial closing. And so until they get to their financial closing, they really want to limit the amount of cash they're putting out. And so we're somewhat embedded in kind of investing in the project with them to say, okay, we're going to negotiate the job and we're going to work with you over the next 12 or 18 months for pre-construction. And we're willing to defer our fee. But during construction, we expect to get a little higher fee than what the market would be, because we're getting compensated for the value that we're bringing during pre-construction as well. And so sometimes we'll agree to that type of model with our clients where, we're kind of investing alongside them and covering some of the expenses during pre-construction rather than billing them along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's brilliant, and that makes sense. But that comes with kind of collaboration and understanding, and your pre-construction focus, which is brilliant. And listen, we could talk about this all day. One thing I want to get involved in, I want to ask you about, but I think it's fantastic. At such a small, I want to ask you as well. You've got Renegade Academy. When did that start? Because for such a startup to get involved with an academy, basically developing and training the next generation of leaders. When did that idea, was that always something from the very, very start that you had planned?
Yeah, it is. So the business was founded around a handful of things. And, the three that I would really point to for the construction company that we look at are execution excellence. And, as a construction company, if you aren't good at execution in all aspects, and we're pretty broad about that, so we're not just talking about safety and quality control. We're talking about pre-construction services, of course. So everything that we do, we've got to strive for excellence in execution. The second fundamental is being really good at developing leaders that drive the future growth of the business. And then the third is challenging the status quo and really trying to innovate and find better ways to execute for the industry, for our own team, really pretty broadly challenging the status quo. So that second pillar and fundamental that I mentioned of developing leaders is how the academy came about. We started very early with recognizing the fact that we needed to develop leaders. And honestly, I wouldn't say that it was any kind of brilliant strategy. It was more of a survival, because we were growing so fast that people had to get promoted into positions they had never experienced before. And, considering a high growth business, and we've always tried to promote from within as much as possible before hiring from outside, and really provide the opportunities to the team that's here. And so we started developing very specific career paths, and that led into mentoring, coaching programs, every individual in our organization has a direct supervisor, but then they also have a mentor that mentors them throughout their career path. So we started with some things that I'd call somewhat organic, like that, we just recognize that people need to develop at a faster pace than they would be able to on their own. We started, things as simple as a book club where we read a leadership book together and talk about it. So we are huge readers and learners in our culture. And then I'd say we formalized the academy around 18, so call it 5 years in business. We formalized it as actual academy and started doing more intentional training, which the intentional side of the training is specific individuals that are identified as high growth opportunity, all have mentors. We have about 30 people in the organization today that work with an executive coach that are mentored and coached the same way that an athlete would be coached. Everyone needs development, and with our culture of learning and the opportunities presented by growth, there's a tremendous need for that. At the same time, we have mastermind groups where it's kind of peer-to-peer type learning, and we have an individual that facilitates those groups as another example of academy planning. And then to add to that, we have multiple levels of leadership training, which we call them prerequisites, principles, and paradigms. So different levels in the organization of entry-level leadership training. And there we're focusing on soft skills. And that's a missing gap in the industry that we're really passionate about. And the average field leader, I think the statistic is that they manage about $300 million of work throughout their career, yet have no formal training. So, it's pretty much a no-brainer that you look at other types of businesses and look at any other industry and find someone that manages $300 million of work or a budget of $300 million and has no management training. And so, the industry, I think, is really good at developing the hard skills, and teaching people. And look, there's always room for improvement, but generally we find that people learn the fundamentals of the business on the job. But then there's this big gap of soft skills, of managing people, working as a member of a team, becoming a mentor to others and developing leaders around you. And so that culture of leadership development is one that we started to focus on with our offsite offerings. I mean, what that looks like, that we really, I've enjoyed personally engaging in this program, but we run offsite leadership camps that we develop the agenda ourselves, we're developing the sessions, and we're actually delivering the content. So it's not farmed out. It's internally led, internally developed. And this year we've got 6 of those planned, just to give you an idea. So every other month we're doing a group, and we've got 12 people as the format of it, that we go to an offsite location. It's a 2-day, very intensive training. Everyone spends the night. We have a lot of team building that's embedded in that. And people come away from that program. And then there's intentional, so there's a lot of preparation that goes in ahead by the candidates, of course, as well as the people who are leading the academy. There's a very intensive 2-day offsite. And then for the 90 days following behind that, there's follow-up in terms of continued development and opportunities for these individuals to advance. And that program has been transformational for us, of doing these offsite leadership development camps.
Incredible, unbelievable. You know what I love about that, especially the mentorship thing? It's not just the senior people mentoring the graduates or the people coming into the business, because that works both ways. It's a reverse mentorship, because there's no doubt about it. The kids coming out of college now have so many good skills that they can teach the more experienced guys within your company. That's what I love about it. And then once you get them off site, kind of in a comfort zone that they're both in comfort, you learn so much more about people as well. And as you say, the soft skills, that gap that you're trying to fill between the college and the job site is something that people are not focusing on. So it's one of the few things. It's one of the few academies focused on the soft skills as well. So congratulations on that. How many people do you bring into that every year, or is it a kind of fluctuating number depending on growth?
Last year, I think the statistics were in 2022, we trained 180 of our people in some form or fashion, and all in different opportunities. And so of our total employee count of 200, 180 of those went through some form of leadership training and programming. And I think it was 2,600 hours of training content was delivered to the team.
Brilliant. Unbelievable, Wes. Unbelievable. I have to say, congratulations on that. And one thing I want to ask as well, because there's a lot of people that listen to my podcast, they're in that middle management or even in the senior management within a company, and they're thinking, am I right? Should I go out and bite the bullet and do a startup? Apart from focusing on pre-construction, the Renegade Academy, what would you say are the success stories, and what advice would you give someone that's considering it and at the other side of the country in Chicago, Boston, LA?
I mean, the industry is certainly a difficult one, and it takes it takes an approach and a lot of different factors that I'd say contribute to success. And number one is being really good at building a team. And I think that's one of the things that we got right and we did a tremendous job with in the beginning, was assembling and building a team. And that goes back. I mean, there's a long history in terms of how our team came together, and a group of people that are like-minded, that have the same values and have an extreme amount of trust as a team. And those individuals, really the snowball started from there for sure. So, getting the right people is number one, because you're not going to come out with any high growth business, construction or otherwise, trying to do it yourself. And so recognizing the value of team and what it takes to actually be successful in a business like this, which, it honestly was challenging, but a lot of fun and rewarding. And so certainly I wouldn't discourage anyone from an entrepreneurial journey. And we're a big believer, and our culture is one of being extremely entrepreneurial. And that's something that unites our entire team here. And keeping that alive and well in our organization is one of the drivers today. Other factors for success are certainly sticking to and being really clear about what your values are. I think there are many times throughout our history that I look back and we made decisions that were based around our values that ultimately turned out to create something extremely positive for the business. And that wasn't always easy to do. And there are many examples that I could certainly point to and give you of how we made a decision that was consistent with our values, that as a startup business, I think I question if other businesses would make the same decisions, because it wasn't the easy decision to make when you're grinding, funding is short, you're challenged in a lot of different ways, and you make a decision that's values based and really keeping your core values and knowing who you are as a business and keeping those as your filter that you make all decisions through, I think is a big part of our success. And then of course in any business, the determination, understanding the hard work that it's going to take, over that 10-year journey. I can't necessarily, I probably don't want to put a number on the amount of hours worked by the key people around here, because it would scare many people off of the entrepreneurial journey. But it takes a lot of hard work, persistence, and not taking no for an answer. And then, also, and again, in our high growth nature, I always look back and I laugh. One specific instance, as we got started in 2013, I met with a bonding company. And of course, like most construction companies, we needed bonding to do some of our projects, and negotiated a deal with our bonding agent and broker that we would have a 10 million, 20 million line. So 10 million per project, 20 million in the aggregate. And then within 2 weeks, we went to them with a $38 million project. And, of course, they thought I was crazy. And, initial answer was no. But luckily, we had a great representative from our bonding company that really believed in the business, believed in the leaders. And, it's a lot more than just cash that goes into a bonding decision. And so they actually agreed that they would back us for the project. And so that's an interesting one that I think I look at and today maybe it feels a little crazy that we were a startup business without a lot of project history and not the amount of required financial capital. And we had called a lucky break of an individual that believed in us, that gave us a chance. And that project turned out to be a huge success and was a big part and a driver that I look back on today of our success. And there are so many examples like that along the way that, we made a decision that, of course, could have gone bad. And so certainly there's a lot of risk in that. But, if you're in high growth mode, you have to be willing to take risk as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And listen, Wes, you know yourself, you obviously made the decision as well to partner with the bonding company. So it was a two-way. It was obviously communicated very well on both ends. And he was obviously very confident in you as the leader, because there's no doubt about it. Within Greater New Orleans, you are a leader with Impetus. A lot of people know of you. There'll be a lot of people listening to the podcast and wondering what's Mad Wes going to do next. What's the plan? What's the growth plans for the next 5 or 10 years?
I've always had a vision, which maybe goes back to pre-construction, that we could be more vertically integrated in the industry. And I think that's generally the way things are headed. And our vision has always been to help the real estate side of the equation find success in terms of how the project is put together from the start, and then transferring that into design, manufacturing, and I'll come back to manufacturing in a second. Of course, holistic pre-construction services, the operational side of the equation, self-performing some of the work and being a true builder, and ultimately being involved in the entire project lifecycle. So one of the new exciting ventures that we have is what we're calling Renegade. So, of course, very fitting for us. So it's RNGD. The web address is thinkrngd.com. And that business that, we call Renegade, although the name, for naming purposes, it's shortened. That is our think tank, our innovation lab. And so we've got a team of innovators in there, data analysts, designers, and then fabricators. So we have a facility that we purchased last year and did some renovations and expansions to, and we're starting to outfit in terms of equipment. But what's coming out of that shop is custom fabrication of decorative metals, architectural millwork, structural steel. And we're actually starting, so in the true prefabrication space, we're in the process of designing a prototype of a structural system that we think is going to drive real value into our projects. And so, we're innovating in this lab atmosphere with that same theme that I tied back to earlier of being a renegade, challenging the status quo, trying to advance the industry. And if we can figure out, we'll start with a structural system. And ultimately what we'd like to do is to have an entire building and a platform type approach. And actually one of the groups that we're working with, which I'm enjoying the collaboration and working relationship with them, is Bride & Wood. I don't know if
Shout out to Brian, yeah.
Out of the UK. And we're working with them. And so, they are engaged with us and trying to come up with a system that makes sense in the US. They've successfully executed some similar type of thoughts in London. And the idea is to bring some of that methodology to the US. And so we're doing that through our Renegade affiliate. And the Renegade business would engage with Impetus in terms of how we deliver on our job sites. And so that's one of the new exciting things that we're spending time on.
Unbelievable, Wes. Unbelievable. Future, thinking about the future. And I mean, even with the idea of doing that will attract people and get people excited and get the fire in their belly. And I'm sure that the current employees that you have are looking at it going, wow, this is amazing. Brilliant. And a shout out to Brian Wood as well. I know that opening up your mind and collaborating across the pond isn't easy, but I'm sure he's helping. When can we see that kind of hitting your production line and hitting your bottom line on projects?
The goal is to have a project started around the end of the year with that structural system. So we're early in design. We've identified a site. And one of the approaches that we took is we're actually going to do the real estate side of that deal as well. So having the ability and the control to drive real efficiency into the design by being able to be involved in real estate, design, manufacturing, and construction. And so we'll test our hypothesis. Now, the goal, of course, is to ultimately use that same approach and service offering across all of our projects and our clients. But instead of asking one of our clients to be the guinea pig, we just said we'll do it ourselves. So
you're putting your money where your mouth is, Wes. I like it.
And so it's very
Mad Wes
exciting.
shouts it's turned again. Now listen to this, right? So you're going to be the real estate developer. You've got the GC, you've got the civil arm, you've got the self-performing, you've got the prefabrication. Are you doing what Katira tried to do?
I wouldn't say it's exactly the same. Certainly, I watched the Katera journey, and of course, we don't want it to end up in the same place that theirs did. So we're much smaller scale. We're gonna certainly not come out as strong as they did. But I mean, I think a lot of the hypothesis, let's just say, that they came up with, and that the way that Katera was approaching projects, there are things to be learned there that I think are positive for the industry. And so it was some people from outside the industry that took a look at the industry and said, there's an opportunity to do better. And so I like that aspect of the way that Katera was working. Now, I think, from my perspective, that they oversimplified, and it's not that easy. And I think that's ultimately what proved out that, they thought it was going to be easier than it actually was to execute. And being that I guess our organization having this expectation of execution excellence means that we have to take more of an approach of crawl, walk, run. And so we're not just going to take off running as it relates to being innovative. And meanwhile, we're still delivering a couple $100 million a year, and this year we're on track to do about 250 million in 23. And so we've still got to do and obviously execute the traditional service offering that has fueled our success and our growth thus far. And juggling this thought process of prefabrication, that's the reason that we established it as its own business. It's actually in a different location, our manufacturing facility. It's got an independent team because Impetus as a construction company is continuing to deliver construction services in a traditional manner. And we're juggling those two simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's real calculated. It's thinking. It's creative, and it's, as you say, it's testing the water. But not only that, you're testing the water, being the real estate arm yourself. So it's just what you've done before. You've put skin in the game. You've stuck your chest out, and you go, you know what, we can do this. And I love the confidence, and I can't wait to see what happens. As I said, literally, Wes, we could sit here and talk for 2 or 3 hours. What I would love to do now, and I want to let the listeners know, I do want to come back to you in 6 or 12 months, see how things are going, and probably pick on a couple of other topics, because the topics that we picked today were brilliant. They were relevant. They were new. They were now. And I want to congratulate you on 10 years of incredible success, and I want to wish you 20, 30, 40 more years of success.
Thank you very much.